Give it up for Salim Ismail, a Miami resident.
Good morning. Let's see if the mic works. Excellent. Our favorite joke at Singularity is that artificial intelligence or AI is really easy, but AV is really hard. And so there are always millions of moving parts around this. How many of you have heard me speak before? Can I just see a show of hands? Okay, a few of you got it. All right. So a little bit about my background. 7 years we've been spending on building out Singularity University. As Ola said, I've spent a couple of years as the head of innovation at Yahoo. I found that when you try and do disruptive innovation in a big company, that the immune system of the company will come and attack you. Right? All of our organizations are built to withstand change and withstand risk. And we're now finding that is the high order driver. And how do we deal with that is part of the deal with the reason I wrote this book a year ago. That's my White House uniform. I tried to adopt a bit of a fintech uniform here today. Many of you wearing the Silicon Valley outfits that we should really all be wearing. Two major points today. One is that all of our intuition, education, training about the world teaches us to think linearly. We take our past performance and we project forward linearly where the world will go. But driven by information, more and more of the world is riding an exponential doubling pattern, and we are not good at that. Right? If I take 30 steps linearly, I'll go 30 meters, I'll go next door. We can all predict really well where I'd be a third of the way or 2/3 of the way in that projection. If I take 30 doubling steps, 2, 4, 8, 16, and I do that 30 times, at step 30, I've gone 1 billion meters. I'm 26 times around the world, which is a bit further than next door. Right? And it's hard to gauge where I am a third of the way and 2/3 of the way in that progression. And much of the world today is being increasingly driven by this exponential curve, not the linear pattern that we're all grown up with. The second point that's related to this is over the last few thousand years, our industries, you could base it on kind of 3 levels of how we think about industries. You have kind of construction, mining, retail, very physicalized products and services, and much of the world ran on that basis. Little by little over the last decade or so, we have some industries where you have the product is physical, like your Kindle or your iPhone, but the revenue streams are all digital and information-based. And then you have some industries like media, books, publishing, that are now increasingly completely information-based. Right? The world used to look like this, very predominantly physical, little by little information-based, but now it's switching around totally to the other way around. And how do we handle that complete switch in how do we deal with this is a difficult thing because the way you manage and manipulate information is completely different. At Singularity, we're based at NASA in Silicon Valley. We live off this curve which Ray Kurzweil put together, the idea that we double computational price performance every 18 months. Ray, his big question when he saw this data was, why is it so smooth and so predictable? And after doing about 10 years of research, he found that any domain or discipline or information area or technology that gets information enabled and acquires informational properties, its price performance starts doubling every 18 to 30 months or so. And we're now seeing all of these technologies moving at this pace, drones, 3D printing, et cetera, et cetera. All of these areas, robotics, biotech, all of them are doubling in their capability every 1 to 2 years. We have never seen so many technologies moving so fast in the history of the world. We get very excited about that. We think technology is a major driver of progress in the world, maybe the only major driver that we've really seen. And when we see so many technologies moving so fast, the potential implications are profound. We've gathered together the world's leading experts in all of these areas, and we think about where does this go. About 80% of our curriculum focuses on the future. Most academics thinks about the past, right? How did this model evolve? How did this equation develop? We think about really where does this go? When we get to the $100 genome, what applications become enabled? Who are the thought leaders in these areas? Where are these technologies intersecting? Who are the labs and companies that are driving this pace forward? We do a whole series of different types of programs. I'll just highlight one. This is a 4-day event that we do with Deloitte and with XPRIZE. We get together CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. You can see some of the logos there. And for 4 days, we give them 2 days of briefings on these technologies and 2 days as to how do you organize for this. We ask them beforehand, how aware are you of some of the breakthroughs that are coming in these different areas? And you could imagine most had very little awareness, half of the rest probably exaggerating if we're honest about it, as to what's actually coming. At the end of the 4 days, is we said, now that you have a good sense of these technologies, how big of an impact do you think this is going to have on your industries? So we gave them a timeline of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years, and a severity scale of low, medium, high, game-changing impact. And the statistic at the top absolutely blew our minds. 80% of these CEOs agreed that these technologies would have a game-changing impact on their industries within 2 years. 100% within 5 years. So that's the gap that we're trying to bridge. Most people have very little awareness of what's coming. When they do, there's this kind of, oh heck moment, and I'm using the polite Canadian term there to deal with it. All right, 4 kind of major dynamics that we're seeing. The first is very obvious, we're digitizing the world. Our memories aren't in our heads now, they're in our smartphones. We're kind of increasingly turning more and more aspects of our world into a digital environment. And every time we add a new layer of information onto the internet, we enable a whole new class of applications that becomes possible, right? And we're seeing that very dramatically in the world today. There's 2 implications. The first is the volatility is accelerating, as Ola mentioned. Big companies are becoming more, it's harder for them to succeed in a shorter space of time. It used to take like 20 years to create a billion-dollar marketplace. We're seeing that happen now in months. And this is the deflationary cliff that we see whenever you fully information-enable an industry. So when the newspaper industry became fully digital, you saw this kind of cliff and a 6x drop in revenues as eBay, Craigslist, and so on sort of bit. The music business had the same cliff, 10x drop in revenues in that industry. We're seeing this cliff, by the way, hit the TV business in the US right now. Right? Media buying is finally catching up with the reality that nobody's watching ads. And the younger generation isn't even watching TV, period. Right? So there's a huge implication coming there. And as I mentioned, we are very bad at spotting this. All of our training, education, intuition, one of our favorite sayings as an expert in a field will tell you how something cannot be done. Right? Not so how will something. Give me a couple of examples. There's a famous kind of graphic from Ericsson. In 2010, they predicted that we would have 50 billion internet-connected devices by 2020. And people thought, wow, that's crazy. In a decade, 50 billion. We were at 500 million when they made this announcement. We're up to about 11 billion today. I was talking to the guys at Ericsson last week, and they've just revised it. They're now saying we'll have 500 billion internet-connected devices by the end of the decade. So their aggressive estimate was 10x off. Right? This is the price of solar that I showed you earlier. The leading expert in solar energy in the world 10 years ago said, look, if you add up the physical cost of the wiring, the glass, et cetera, you simply will not drop below about $1 a watt. Okay? It just can't be done. You can see how this has continued to drop. Last year we had 50 cents a watt. We just dropped below 18 cents a watt. And his latest announcement was, yes, okay, getting below $1 has exceeded my expectations. So beware the expert, right? When Google launched its Loon project 3 years ago, there were 2 buckets of naysayers that said, look, this will never work. The first were the balloon experts who said, look, a weather balloon goes up, the material freezes at high altitude, it cracks, holes appear, comes down. No weather balloon stays up for more than about 3 weeks. You're crazy to try this. We're balloon experts. It's what we do. The second were the telcos who said, look, you can't deliver broadband from that high. The power requirements are too high. The equipment will be too heavy. And as I mentioned, without a receiver, they're getting 10 megabits today. If you have a specialized receiver, you're getting 40 megabits of LTE down to the ground today. And so one of these models is going to explode. Part of the question now becomes, what do you do? What do you do with this? We're digitizing every aspect of the business lifecycle. Sales and marketing now completely information-driven and digital. This is the quote that really struck me. David Rose is one of our faculty, one of the godfathers of angel investing, made the point that all of our organizations are built for efficiency and they're built for predictability. They're not built for disruptive change. And we're seeing a new breed of organization today. We've learned how to scale technology pretty well. The big challenge is now, how do you scale the actual organization, which is painfully incremental and painfully linear. And so I wrote this book. It came out a year ago. Last week, Fortune announced it as one of the top 5 business books of the year, so that's kind of a nice thing to do. Here's the core economic thesis, and this goes straight to the financial question. Our old way of building a business was to get an asset or a workforce, put a legal boundary around it, and sell access to scarcity. Right? Selling scarcity has been the foundation of business for several thousand years. What we're seeing today is now over 100 companies that are not selling scarcity, they're selling actually abundance, a different business model. And the way they're operating is completely different. They're all achieving a minimum 10x performance improvement compared to their competition in the same space. If you're a car company, it takes about $3 billion to design a new car model from scratch. Local Motors does it for $3 million. That's 1,000 times better than the status quo. Right? And now, as I said, we've identified about 100 companies. We actually went on CNBC a few months ago and announced a ranking of the Fortune 100 ranked by how scalable is the actual org structure. There you can see the list there. At the top, a lot of very digital companies, fairly obviously. At the bottom, a lot of energy companies. Right? It makes sense. If you're shipping oil across the country, you don't need a lot of adaptability and change in your org structure. You're doing the same thing over and over again. But as solar energy is coming along, you'd better figure that out. Right? And so interesting to see this. The most interesting thing was we did a partnership with Hult Business Schools who found that your stock market performance correlates with how flexible and adaptable your org structure is. Makes sense because as the external world becomes more volatile, your ability to adapt to it is going to drive market performance. And hence we see the change going in some of these groups. There's a great story in the book from Citigroup. A year ago, we did a conference, and we had somebody from the interest rates division at Citigroup come. And about 6 months ago, I saw him at another conference, and I said, "How's it going?" He goes, "Great, your book works great." I went and implemented all the ideas into my division, and I said, "How's that going?" And he said, "Well, I just got a call from senior management asking, what the hell am I doing?" They said, "I've achieved more in 3 months than they've been able to do in 5 years in this division." And I said, "Great, that's great. You told him, right?" And he goes, "Absolutely not. You're like my competitive edge. Finance is cutthroat. I'm not telling anybody." So over the course of the thing, we actually beat him up enough that and he got permission from Citi to put the story into the book to show that you can actually radically change the internal mechanisms of how you work. Here's the core economic thesis around these new organizations. When you're running a business, you worry about managing cost of supply and cost of demand. Right? And you try and optimize around both of those. What the internet did for us for the first time ever, it allowed us to drop the cost of demand exponentially. Online marketing, referral marketing. If you get a viral loop, your acquisition costs go completely to zero. What these new exponential organizations have figured out is how do you drop the cost of supply exponentially? Airbnb's marginal cost to add a hotel room is almost zero. Right? If you're Hyatt, you have to build a whole hotel. Same with Uber. Many of you use Waze, the traffic application, which seems to be legally mandated in Latin American cities. If you join Waze, when it piggybacks on your GPS, your demand and your supply. When you can take out your cost of supply, your market cap explodes because you've taken out the denominator. And that's why the market cap of these companies is so explosive. This is just in 10 quarters. The change in market cap of some of the leading exponential organizations, unbelievable. Uber is now, what, 70 billion. So this is also already 3x out of date in a year. So in terms of advising big companies, which we're doing a lot of today, we have two basic suggestions. One is update your leadership that this is happening. If they're not aware of this radical change that's coming, you've got a big problem. This is a survey of awareness of startups by bank executives. Many of you are familiar with Lending Club, right? A multi-billion-dollar public company doing peer-to-peer loans, 45% of bank execs have never heard of it. That's criminal negligence. You have no business determining strategy for your company if you don't know this exists. And so before, we did most of our innovation from the inside and then sold it outside. Today, you can't afford not to be aware of what's going on the outside. The second big structural recognition we have and recommendation we have is don't try and take your big existing organization and transform it into one of these. It's too hard, very political, takes a ton of time, costs a ton of money. But you can take disruptive change agents inside your organization to the edge and have them build one of these off the edge. 3-4 years ago, Larry Page came to me at one of our Singularity events and said, "Hey, your innovation unit at Yahoo Brickhouse was really great. Should I do that at Google?" And I said, "No, because you'll evoke the same immune system problem. But do something like it and point it outward." And the result is Google X, where they've added this massive purpose, or the moonshots as they call it, and they use their core capabilities and then they expand into other areas, cars, contact lenses, Google Loon, et cetera, et cetera. The Google car collects a gigabyte of data per second per car. And that's what's interesting about it for them, right? The master of this particular technique is Apple. Apple has built the most successful company in history. And yeah, they have a great design capability, but so do other people. And they have a great technology supply chain, but that's a commodity in a sense. The real innovation is actually an organization one. What Apple does, unlike anybody else, is they'll take a small disruptive team, keep it totally stealth, take it to the edge of the organization, and they'll say, go disrupt another industry. So they started with what? Music, and then phones, and now tablets, payments, cars, watches, healthcare. There's no limit to their market cap. They can just keep going after industry after industry. And you see the responses now starting to happen as industries wake up. Every big company is now either you're the disruptor or you're the disrupted. And you pretty much have to make a choice as to which way you want to be. We are seeing big companies do some interesting things. I'll just point one of them out. Amazon has a great policy internally called the institutional yes. They realize that in any big company, it's really easy to say no to an idea. Right? One of 50 people can say no, it kills the idea. So inside Amazon, if you come to me with an idea, my default answer has to be yes. If I want to say no, I have to write a 2-page thesis on why it's a bad idea and post it publicly. Right? So we've created friction and embarrassment to saying no, meaning that many more ideas get tried and tested all the way through. Okay? I was talking with Werner Vogels. One of the results of this was actually Amazon Web Services, one of the most successful products in history. Nobody could figure out how to say no to it, nothing to do with their core business. Right? And so this is what's possible today in large organizations. The success criteria that we're seeing in this new age, which is what smarter companies are going after, is you have to become a platform. If you look at the internet world, Nokia, BlackBerry, Yahoo failed to become platforms. Right? Apple, Google, Facebook have successfully become platforms, and then you can launch new characteristics on top of it. And so that's basically the heuristic around it. We're now running very aggressive 10-week sprints where we're taking a partner with Rocker Labs here in Miami, and we've co-built a company out of this to take companies, senior management teams, and move them 2 years in their thinking forward in just 10 weeks. Key to that is how do you deal with the immune system response that large organizations typically have, and how do you mitigate that so that you can actually do aggressive innovation internally? Let me close with this story, which I think kind of brings it home. Many of us think that this kind of information world is very aggressively hitting our obvious places, but you see lots of traditional industries and you say, I just don't see how that can be disrupted, right? So here's a great little story. It turns out that if you own a car wash in Buenos Aires over the last 6-8 years, you've seen a 50% drop in revenue in your business. Okay? And one of our alumni, Santiago Bilincas, who's a famous businessman down there, looked at this and said, this makes no sense. The middle class has exploded. There's a ton more luxury cars. Argentinians are really proud. They like to keep their cars clean. If anything, you should see a tripling of revenues, not a 50% drop. So are there regulatory restrictions? Is there increased competition? Is there water scarcity? What's actually going on? Went through and spent 3 months analyzing this, was able to kind of discount all of the normal factors, and he finally found the answer. And the answer turns out to be that because of increased computational power, our ability to predict the weather has gone up dramatically. And we're 50% better over the last 6 years at knowing when it's going to rain. And when you know it's going to rain, you don't wash your car. Right? And so here's a completely orthogonal effect of increased computational ability delivering a body blow to an industry that you think should be pretty immune from this. And if it doesn't matter how smart you are as a car wash owner, you're not going to figure this out. And what we're seeing is industry after industry is being hit by this orthogonal effect of information. I mentioned these, today you can get $100 headsets that give you a pretty good fidelity readout as to what brainwave frequencies are going through your brain. One of our startups is called Focus at Will. It's a Pandora type service you plug in and your brain goes in the zone because they've got a feedback loop around what music patterns will generate an alpha state frequency wave, brainwave pattern. Now, if you're Red Bull, you need to be seriously worried about that. Right? But they won't see it coming. In fact, we had the CEO of Illy Coffee in one of our executive programs. He started swearing in Italian from the back. And we said, are you okay? And he goes, no, if people start using that, they'll drink less coffee. Right? And he's right. He's now making wine, by the way. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, if we had anything to do with that. As a side effect of this Focus at Will thing, they found that that's better for any of the kids with ADD and ADHD than any of the drugs they're giving them today. And so huge impacts orthogonally of information across the board. What we're now starting to do is thinking about, okay, we have all of this disruptive technology coming. The real difficulty is now how do we absorb this into society? Right? In the 1500s, we had the Gutenberg moment. The printing press changed everything. You could frame it today that we're having about 30 Gutenberg moments at the same time. Now, every single mechanism that we use to run the world, our civics, our politics, our legal systems, healthcare, education, intellectual property, you name it, all designed for a world a few hundred years ago, not for today. Definitely not for 500 billion or a trillion sensors coming down the pike. We're actually going to need to re-architect every single mechanism by how we manage society. And so something we're doing now with Maurice Furey and Rodrigo Arboleda is creating a new institute to say, how can we take new ideas and very rapidly, in parallel, create the design thinking, regulatory side, security assessment, policy framework so that we can absorb new technologies into society very, very quickly. As this now becomes the high order bit, and how we deal with this is going to be a huge problem and a huge stress, but also a huge opportunity at the same time. And generally, at a very philosophical level, we're actually moving the modality of the world. We're moving the world from a conversation about money and commerce, which has been the main driver of progress in the last few thousand years, to now a conversation about information. Right? Today, they're fungible. You can turn information into money and vice versa. But little by little, information becomes the harder bit. If you're a startup, you're more interested in collecting information about your users than the money from them initially, and you hope to monetize it later. And now banks are starting to recognize this, which used to move money around. Now, essentially, banks move information around, and capturing that is interesting. And the fintech world, driven by the blockchain, is going to have a lot of the trappings, the vaults, the financial security, a lot of the protocols, and how do you navigate and manage money effectively will now shift to how do you manage information effectively across the board. And so huge opportunities and also huge disruption coming along this area. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I hope you have a great day.